Imagine waking up, right? And your brain is just utterly convinced you are in mortal danger. Your chest is tight, your heart is hammering against your ribs.
Yeah, your whole body is just flooded with adrenaline.
Exactly. But you aren't being chased by a predator or, in a war zone. You are just standing in your kitchen and your partner just asked you, maybe with a slight edge in their voice, why you didn't unload the dishwasher.
Which, to most people, is just a minor domestic annoyance.
Right. It's nothing. But for a specific, widely misunderstood neurological profile, I mean, that minor criticism triggers an instantaneous, catastrophic physiological response.
It's an emotional allergy. It's so severe that the person might literally flee the house in a blind panic. Or, just collapse to the floor weeping.
Yeah, like they've suffered a fatal wound, because it is a complete and utter hijacking of the central nervous system.
It really is. The logical brain shuts down, the survival brain takes the wheel, and the pain they're experiencing, it's not metaphorical. It is agonizingly real.
And when you take that kind of intense, invisible neurological reality and try to run it through standard medical diagnostics, well, the system just breaks down completely.
Oh, absolutely. It shatters.
Right, because usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this comforting expectation of precision. You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points to it and says, there's the problem.
It's binary, broken or not broken.
But you step into the world of adult neurodevelopment, and that x-ray machine is utterly useless. We are looking at a diagnostic landscape that is incredibly complex, deeply layered, and almost entirely internal.
We are navigating absolute diagnostic muddy waters here. For decades, the public, and quite frankly, the medical understanding of autism has been rigidly defined by observable external behaviors.
Usually based on young boys, right?
Exactly, evaluated from an entirely neurotypical perspective. If you didn't line up your toys or flap your hands, you weren't autistic. But that fundamentally ignores the internal, lived reality of millions of people.
Which means we have to flip the lens. And that is exactly our mission today.
Welcome to this deep dive. If you're listening to this, you might be here looking for answers about yourself, maybe a loved one, or you're just looking to understand neurodiversity on a deeper level.
And we are so glad you're here with us.
We are going to pull apart what we're calling the Hidden Autistic Experience, and we're doing this by synthesizing this massive, profound stack of sources.
We've got clinical insights from psychologists like Dr. James Thatcher and Dr. William Dodson.
Yeah, and we are looking at the cutting-edge biological research from Dr. Emily Casanova regarding the actual physical tissue of the body, which is wild.
It's fascinating, but arguably, most importantly, we are grounding all of this in the lived experience narratives of autistic adults themselves.
Right, drawing from creators like Chris at the AutoKit channel and Kristen Hubbett from The Other Autism, we are taking all these disparate threads, the emotional volatility, the physical pain, the relationship chaos, and weaving them together to understand what it really means to be an undiagnosed or late diagnosed autistic adult. And I want to be very, very clear about the vibe and the lens we're using for this exploration. We are intentionally moving away from the pathology paradigm.
No clinical deficit checklists today.
No, this isn't a list of things that are, broken or wrong with a person. Our goal is to make sense of a lifetime of feeling fundamentally different.
We're going to connect the dots between the neurological hardware, the emotional software, and the physical chassis of the body. Because when you see how they all link together, it completely reframes behaviors that society usually just dismisses as lazy or dramatic or irrational.
Changes everything.
So let's start with the most pervasive experience described across all of our sources, which is the absolute crushing systemic drain that so many late diagnosed adults endure daily.
The burnout.
The burnout. If you spend your entire life operating a system in an environment it wasn't built for, eventually the system crashes. Dr. James Thatcher, who works extensively with neurodivergent individuals, gives us this brilliant conceptual model for this.
Yeah, he asks us to imagine the human nervous system as a smartphone battery.
And we all know that universal anxiety of watching that little battery icon turn red.
Oh, absolutely. But Dr. Thatcher asks us to look at why the battery is draining so fast. Throughout a normal day, an autistic adult is running multiple, incredibly heavy processing apps in the background of their brain constantly.
Like what? What's draining the power?
Well, first, you have the standard executive function app, right? Doing your job, paying bills, remembering to buy groceries.
The stuff everyone has to do.
Right. But layered underneath that, you have the sensory processing app running at maximum capacity. This app is frantically trying to filter out the hum of the fluorescent lights, the harshness of a coworker's perfume, the agonizing texture of a stiff collar.
And those are background processes for a neurotypical brain,
Right.
but they require active manual processing for an autistic brain.
Precisely. And then you add the most draining app of all, which is the social masking app.
Ah, masking. That takes an immense amount of cognitive computing power, doesn't it?
It's staggering. The brain is manually calculating, like, am I making the correct amount of eye contact? Is it too much? Am I staring? Did my tone of voice sound sarcastic?
Let me modulate my pitch. Let me suppress my natural urge to fidget so I appear professional.
Exactly. So you have this phone running 3 massive high-definition games at the exact same time.
The battery is plummeting.
And when that phone battery hits 10% and the person never truly gets a chance to plug it in and charge it back to 100, what happens?
The phone isn't broken. It's not choosing to be lazy.
No, the operating system automatically switches into low power mode. It starts systematically shutting down non-essential features in order to protect the hardware from a catastrophic system failure.
The screen dims,
Mm.
apps refuse to open, processing speed just crawls to a halt.
And that physical and neurological shutdown is autistic burnout. It is fundamentally a capacity issue. It's a biological imperative to survive, not a character flaw.
And that distinction, I mean, it changes everything for someone who has spent 30 or 40 years blaming themselves. Because the daily reality of this burnout is brutal, and it breeds deep, deep shame.
Our sources provided some very vivid, painful lived experiences of what this actually looks like on the ground.
Yet it goes far beyond just feeling tired after a long week. It manifests as this massive, impenetrable wall hitting you midday, or what Dr. Thatcher calls evening collapse.
Where you manage to hold the mask together at work, you walk through your front door, and you don't just relax on the couch. You literally lose the ability to speak or move.
The central nervous system essentially just cuts the power cord. There is this incredibly poignant story from Chris, the adult who runs the Autokit channel. He described a period in his career where he found himself sleeping on the floor of his office.
Wow.
He kept a tally. He noted that it was the 18th time that month he had ended up on the floor. He knew the carpet was gross. He knew he could get fired if someone walked in.
And he couldn't stop.
Right. His internal monologue was viciously berating him, calling himself a failure, wondering why everyone else in the office could just sit at their desks and do their jobs while he was hiding on the ground.
You can just feel the weight of that internal shame. He is judging a neurological shutdown through the lens of a moral failing.
Completely. Chris described the sensation of waking up from these forced naps. He said his mind and body felt entirely broken, comparing the physical sensation to being crushed by an aircraft carrier.
An aircraft carrier? That's so heavy.
The sheer gravity of the burnout made it hard to formulate a thought, hard to move his limbs, even hard to draw a full breath. And to fight it, he developed this rigid, desperate routine.
What did he do?
He would force himself to get up and make a latte. The crazy thing is, he hated the taste of lattes, and his doctor had explicitly told him to avoid caffeine because of his anxiety.
Oh, man.
But he would meticulously make this drink, just to shock his system into staying awake for 30 more minutes of work. It was a brutal battle against his own biology. And it circles back to that core question, why am I feeling it just being a person?
But that shame actually accelerates the burnout. The shame tells him he just needs to push harder, try harder, be more resilient. But demanding more resilience from a nervous system in low power mode is like demanding someone sprint a marathon on a shattered femur.
The structure cannot support the demand.
It just can't.
Now, I want to pause and play devil's advocate here for a second, because we need to get into the clinical weeds. If I am a clinician observing Chris, he's sleeping on the floor, he feels crushed by life, he has zero energy, he's trapped in a cycle of self-loathing. To the outside world, that presentation perfectly mirrors severe clinical depression.
It looks identical on the surface.
Right. So how do we differentiate a major depressive episode from autistic burnout? Because if you treat one like the other, you could do real damage.
You could do massive damage, and unfortunately, this misdiagnosis happens constantly in the medical field. The differentiation lies in the root cause and the underlying biological mechanism.
Okay, break that down for me.
Well, severe clinical depression is primarily a mood disorder, right? It often involves a chemical imbalance of serotonin or dopamine that affects the reward centers of the brain. You lose the will to live, or you lose the ability to feel pleasure, which is clinically called anhedonia.
So depression is a failure of the joy and motivation circuitry.
Broadly speaking, yes. But autistic burnout is rooted in sensory and social overload. It is a neurological exhaustion of the processing circuitry.
So it's not the mood, it's the processor.
Exactly. The brain is physically protecting itself from an environment that demands more processing power than the nervous system can supply. Dr. Thatcher explains that clinicians can spot the difference by looking for 3 specific hallmarks of burnout that don't typically align with standard depression.
What are the 3 hallmarks?
A sudden loss of established skills, a severe spike in sensory sensitivity, and a complete inability to maintain the social mask.
Okay, let's unpack those. What does a loss of skills actually look like?
It means things that you could do easily last month suddenly become incredibly difficult or impossible. A highly articulate person might start stuttering or just losing their words mid-sentence.
Or someone who is a great cook suddenly finds the executive function required to boil pasta completely overwhelming.
Exactly.
And what about the sensory spike?
When the battery is drained, the brain no longer has the power to filter stimuli. So the hum of the refrigerator suddenly sounds like a chainsaw. The tag on their shirt feels like sandpaper scraping their skin.
Yeah.
Their sensory gates are just thrown wide open.
Oh, wow. So everything is just turned up to 11?
Yes, and here is the crucial test. If you take a person with clinical depression and put them in a dark, quiet room with 0 demands, the depression is still there. Their brain is still telling them life is hopeless. But if you take a person in autistic burnout and put them in a dark, quiet, sensory-deprived room, their battery slowly begins to charge. The removal of sensory and social demands actually initiates a physiological recovery.
The environment is the poison, so removing the environment is the cure. That makes complete sense. So practically speaking, what does someone listening do if they recognize themselves in Chris's story? Because sleeping on the office floor 18 times a month isn't a sustainable life plan.
No, it's not. Dr. Thatcher suggests a very structured, actionable strategy called the battery audit.
Okay, how does that work?
The goal is to make the invisible drains visible. He advises sitting down and identifying the 2 things in your daily life that are draining your battery the fastest.
The first one is usually glaringly obvious, right? Like your 9-to-5 job or a toxic boss or a specific high-conflict relationship.
Exactly. But the second drain requires microscopic honesty about your sensory and executive realities.
Like realizing the grocery store isn't just a chore. It's a sensory assault of fluorescent lights, overlapping music, and complex spatial navigation.
Exactly. Or realizing that the daily transition of getting your kids out the door in the morning requires so much micromanagement and task switching that your battery drops 30% before 8 a.m.
So once you identify these specific leaks, you have to find ways to plug them or accommodate them.
Right, like wearing noise-canceling headphones at the store or prepping everything the night before. But the second half of the audit is equally crucial. You must identify one small activity that truly, genuinely recharges the battery.
And Thatcher makes a vital distinction here, doesn't he? Mindless consumption does not count.
It does not count at all.
Doom scrolling TikTok at 2 a.m. is off the table.
It is entirely off the table. Scrolling, binge-watching TV, drinking alcohol, these are numbing activities. They distract the brain from the pain of the low battery, but they do not plug the phone into the wall.
They just pause the drain, maybe?
Barely even that. A recharging activity has to be something that signals safety to your nervous system, allowing it to drop out of fight or flight and actually exhale.
This circles perfectly back to Chris, because his solution was wildly counterintuitive for a professional adult. Chris worked in a school program with autistic children.
Right.
And he noticed something fascinating. These kids had massive cognitive demands placed on them. They had meltdowns, they struggled. But they didn't seem to suffer from this specific, soul-crushing brand of adult burnout. He analyzed the difference in their lifestyles and realized the missing variable.
What was it?
The children laughed, and the children played.
They engaged in activities entirely divorced from productivity.
Exactly. Chris remembered this specific remote control car he desperately wanted as a child, but his family couldn't afford it. So, as a deeply burned out, exhausted adult, he went to a hobby shop and bought it.
Good for him.
He took this RC car to an empty park, set it on the dirt, and pulled the trigger on the remote. He said within 2 minutes of watching this little car zip around the grass, he was giggling out loud. For the first time in years, the crushing weight of the aircraft carrier lifted. He felt light.
It is the concept of play as biological medicine. Play is defined as an activity done entirely for its own sake. There is no KPI, there's no deadline, no social expectation.
It bypasses the executive function and social masking apps entirely.
Yes, for a neurodivergent adult, intentionally scheduling time for pure, joyful, unproductive play is not a luxury. It is a neurological necessity. It plugs the system directly into the power source.
It reclaims the joy that the masking stole. But, this brings us to a fascinating domino effect. Let's look at what happens when that battery is chronically lingering at 10% and a new demand is
Now,
introduced.
this is where it gets really complicated.
Right, because when the brain is operating in that desperate low power mode, it becomes hyper defensive. It
Mm.
constantly scans the environment for any new request, any new expectation that might drain those last few drops of energy.
The brain begins to treat everyday tasks not as chores, but as literal threats to its survival.
And this causal chain leads us directly into a deeply misunderstood profile on the autism spectrum, pathological demand avoidance, or PDA.
PDA is arguably one of the most complex and heavily stigmatized presentations of neurodivergence. In the United States, it is still fighting for widespread clinical recognition, though, as Diane Gould, a clinical social worker and PDA expert, points out, it has been recognized and studied in the UK since the 1980s.
Yeah, and the medical establishment uses the term pathological demand avoidance, but the autistic community and advocates strongly prefer to reframe the acronym.
Right. They do. They prefer to call it a pervasive drive for autonomy.
Because attaching the word pathological immediately frames the person as broken or difficult or diseased.
Exactly. Pathological implies a deliberate, malicious refusal to comply. It frames it as a behavioral issue that needs to be disciplined away. But when you reframe it as a pervasive drive for autonomy, you suddenly understand the biological mechanism at play.
It's an anxiety-driven, obsessive need to avoid everyday demands and expectations in order to maintain a sense of control over a deeply overwhelmed nervous system.
The fundamental rule of understanding PDA is that it is a can't, not a won't.
We really need to drill down into that distinction. Because a skeptical listener might think, look, I hate doing my taxes. I avoid folding my laundry. Nobody likes demands. We all procrastinate.
Sure, everyone procrastinates.
Right, so how is PDA biologically different from standard human procrastination?
The difference lies entirely in the autonomic nervous system's response to the demand. If a neurotypical person procrastinates doing the dishes, it's because the task is boring or they'd rather watch TV. It's a preference.
Yeah.
When a person with a PDA profile perceives a demand to do the dishes, their amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, fires as if they have just encountered a predator. The expectation triggers a literal fight, flight, or freeze response.
The anxiety floods their system with cortisol, and their executive function just locks down.
They literally, physically cannot execute the task, even if their logical brain wants to.
It's a neurological brick wall. And our sources highlighted how this infiltrates the absolute minutia of daily life for a late-diagnosed adult. We aren't just talking about avoiding massive projects like defending a PhD thesis or filing complex corporate taxes.
No, we are talking about basic conversational expectations becoming entirely paralyzing.
Diane Gould shared a story about a well-known PDA advocate in the UK named Harry Thompson. When Harry was young, his mother simply saying good morning to him as he came downstairs was enough to ruin his entire day.
The stress would instantly spike.
And it wasn't because he hated his mom. It was because the phrase good morning carries an unspoken societal demand. You are expected to say good morning back. That tiny social contract, that micro expectation, was enough to trigger his threat response.
It's about the perceived loss of autonomy. The moment an expectation is placed upon a PDA, or even a polite one, the oxygen is sucked out of the room. They feel trapped by the requirement to perform.
There was another even more heartbreaking example in the sources about a little girl who loved reading. She saw a specific book, begged her parents for it, talked about it constantly. When she finally received it, she carried it everywhere. She slept with it under her pillow.
But she couldn't open it?
She couldn't read a single page. Why? Because her parents and teachers, trying to be supportive, kept asking her, how's the book? Are you reading your book? What's it about?
The external expectation to read the book, combined with her own internal pressure to enjoy it, became so suffocating that the act of reading became a neurological threat.
The demand ruin the desire.
And this specific dynamic reveals why traditional parenting and standard behavioral therapies fail so spectacularly with PDA individuals.
Because in standard behavioral therapy, like ABA, the core mechanism is compliance driven by reward.
Right. If a child or an employee does a good job, you shower them with praise, you give them a sticker, or you offer a bonus, assuming that will motivate them to repeat the behavior. But Diane Gould points out a shocking twist. For a PDAer, praise and rewards actually amplify the anxiety.
Wait, praise makes it worse. Because praise is just a disguised demand for future performance.
Exactly. If you praise a PDA employee on Monday for submitting a flawless report, their brain does not feel pride. Their brain immediately registers a terrifying new demand. They now expect me to perform at this exact level on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. I have set a new baseline.
What if I fail? What if I lose my autonomy to this expectation? The reward becomes a suffocating trap.
It absolutely does.
It makes me think of a very specific analogy.
Yeah.
Imagine someone hands you a beautifully wrapped gift. It's the exact book you wanted or the exact job promotion you worked for. But you can clearly see that the box is wired to a loud, piercing alarm system.
Right.
You want the gift. You really do.
Huh.
But you know with absolute certainty that the moment your fingers touch the ribbon, the alarm is going to go off, the noise will be deafening, the pressure will be unbearable, and you will be paralyzed by the shock. So you just sit there, staring at the box, unable to touch the thing you actually want.
That perfectly encapsulates the internal paralysis of the PDA can't. The alarm system is the autonomic nervous system's threat response. The pressure is the anxiety.
So practically, how does an adult with PDA survive in modern society?
Yeah.
If praise backfires, if rewards trigger panic, if a boss saying, "I need this by Friday," causes a biological fight-or-flight response, how do you hold down a job?
It's incredibly difficult.
How do you maintain a marriage? How do we even take out the garbage without having a meltdown?
It requires a radical paradigm shift in communication. You cannot use force, and you cannot use traditional incentives. Diane Gould explains that the most effective, actionable coping strategy relies on something called declarative language and an invitational approach.
Declarative language.
Yes, the goal is to bypass the amygdala's threat detection by completely removing the direct demand, thereby giving the PDAer back their oxygen, their autonomy.
Walk me through the mechanics of declarative language. What does that actually sound like in a high-stakes environment?
Well, directive language uses commands and pronouns that corner the person. You need to finish this report. I want you to take out the trash. Go clean your room.
Standard orders.
Right. Declarative language relies on neutral observations, shared wonder, and collaboration. You state facts about the environment and leave space for the person to initiate the solution.
Give me a before and after scenario for a workplace.
Okay. Directive. You must submit the quarterly data by 5 p.m. Friday. This triggers the PDA alarm. The employee freezes.
And the declarative version.
Declarative. I'm looking at our project timeline, and it looks like the quarterly data is the last piece we need before the weekend. I wonder what the best approach is to get that wrapped up.
You have presented the problem neutrally. You haven't dictated the how or the when. You've invited them to use their autonomy to solve the puzzle.
It softens the edges of the demand.
And in a domestic setting.
Instead of, "You need to take out the trash, it stinks," you might say, "Wow, I noticed the trash can is overflowing and making the kitchen smell." You state the reality.
You allow their brain to recognize the problem and choose to fix it, rather than being forced to comply with an order.
Exactly. For an adult with PDA managing their own life, the ultimate life hack is designing an environment with maximum flexibility.
Like gravitating toward freelance work.
Yes, freelance work or entrepreneurship where they are their own boss, turning their special interests into their career so the internal drive outpaces the demand avoidance. It is a constant, delicate balancing act of hacking your own operating system to ensure you always feel like you have a choice.
Because autonomy is the antidote to the anxiety.
Precisely.
But let's follow the logical progression of this hypersensitive threat detection system. If your brain is wired to perceive an everyday demand, a chore, a greeting, a compliment, as a literal threat to your survival, that means your emotional regulation system is operating at maximum tension, 24/7.
It's perpetually wound up.
It's like a guitar string wound so tight that even a gentle breeze makes it shriek. So if your brain reacts that violently to an expectation, what happens when it encounters actual, genuine social friction?
It's explosive.
Right. What happens when you face real criticism or mockery or a romantic rejection? The system doesn't just alarm, it detonates. And that detonation brings us to the third major pillar of this hidden experience: Rejection Sensitive Dysphoria, or RSD.
RSD is a phenomenon that originally gained clinical traction within the ADHD community, championed by psychiatrists like Dr. William Dodson. But over the last few years, we have realized it is a massive, defining component of the autistic experience as well.
And the name itself is intense.
Very. To truly grasp the severity of RSD, we have to look at the etymology of the term. Dysphoria is derived from Greek, and it translates literally to unbearable.
Unbearable. That is a heavy absolute word for a medical diagnosis.
It is entirely intentional. RSD is clinically defined as episodic, sudden attacks of intense physical and emotional pain, triggered by the real or perceived rejection, criticism, or failure of the individual.
Real or perceived. That's a big distinction.
It is, and the key differentiating words here are sudden and unbearable. We are not talking about feeling disappointed because you didn't get a promotion. We're talking about an instantaneous, catastrophic biological event.
Kristen Holmett, the host of The Other Autism, really dug into Dr. Dodson's clinical case studies and the impact of RSD on the trajectory of a late diagnosed adult's life is just staggering. It dictates everything: career choices, friendships, romantic partners.
People will contort their entire existence just to avoid triggering this pain.
Walk us through some of the specific case studies she highlighted. The manifestations can be incredibly diverse.
She broke down the story of patient one, who was a 29-year-old engineering student. Academically, he was brilliant, he made incredible grades, but his internal life was a landscape of absolute torture.
Because of the RSD.
Right. He experienced these episodic attacks of intense shame, self-hatred, and physical chest pain anytime he perceived that a professor, a peer, or a friend withdrew their approval. And it hit him without warning.
The pain of these attacks was so severe, so neurologically traumatizing, that he completely altered his life to avoid the trigger. He never asked anyone on a date because the mere mathematical possibility of them saying no was too agonizing to risk.
He never applied for internships?
Eventually, the fear of failing a test or being critiqued by a professor became so overwhelming that he stopped going to class entirely and dropped out of his engineering program.
He systematically shrank his entire universe down to the size of a closet, just to guarantee he would never encounter the pain of rejection.
Exactly. It's a defensive shrinking. But RSD doesn't always turn inward into avoidance and shame. Sometimes the threat response turns outward. Hovet also talked about patient 4, who's a 42-year-old married woman.
This case really highlights the volatility.
When her husband will offer a minor criticism, maybe about how she loaded the car or managed the schedule, she didn't just get defensive. Her amygdala would perceive his criticism as an existential attack.
She would erupt into a sudden, blinding, vitriolic rage, screaming and attacking him verbally to neutralize the threat.
Or the pain would overwhelm her so fast that she would collapse into tears, stating that the criticism physically hurt her body so badly she had to flee the house to survive the emotional flooding.
And this presents a massive problem in the psychiatric world. Put yourself in the shoes of a general practitioner or a standard therapist. A patient comes in reporting sudden, severe emotional outbursts. 1 minute they are fine, the next they are either experiencing instant suicidal ideation or explosive, uncontrollable rage.
What does the doctor diagnose? Bipolar disorder? Or borderline personality disorder? Hovet points out that this misdiagnosis happens constantly, especially for autistic women.
Constantly. The mood shifts are so extreme that they look like bipolar or BPD. But Dr. Dodson emphasizes a critical differentiating factor, which is the speed and the trigger.
How so?
Bipolar mood shifts, moving from mania to depression, they typically take weeks or months to develop. They are slow, cyclical changes in brain chemistry, and they aren't necessarily tied to a specific external event.
Right.
RSD shifts happen in a microsecond. They are instantaneous, and they always have a clear antecedent: a perceived or real rejection, criticism, or failure.
Here is the analogy that really locked this concept into place for me. RSD is essentially an emotional allergy. Think about how a peanut allergy works. Your physical immune system is designed to fight off real threats, like viruses. But if you have peanut allergy, your immune system is fundamentally confused.
It encounters a harmless protein and panics.
It sounds the nuclear alarm. It triggers a full-blown anaphylactic response. Your throat closes, your blood pressure drops, you could die. RSD is the exact same mechanism, but in the emotional immune system. Your brain encounters a tiny speck of social pollen. A friend cancels dinner because they got a flat tire, or a boss sends a slightly brief email.
Your logical brain knows it's fine.
But your emotional immune system triggers full anaphylaxis. Your throat tightens, you can't breathe, your brain flashes neon signs saying, they hate you, you are worthless, everyone is going to abandon you.
The biological reaction is wildly disproportionate to the trigger, but the physical reality of the choking, the panic, the pain, it is 100% real to the person experiencing it.
That is a phenomenal, medically accurate analogy. And because we are dealing with a physiological anaphylactic shock, the way we treat it has to change completely.
It has to. Standard cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is the gold standard for most anxiety. CBT asks you to use your prefrontal cortex to logic your way out of a feeling. Is there evidence they hate you? No. Then let's reframe our thoughts.
But during an RSD attack, the prefrontal cortex is completely bypassed.
The amygdala has taken over. You cannot logic your way out of an allergic reaction.
If my throat is closing from a peanut allergy, asking me to write down a list of positive affirmations about my breathing isn't going to help. I need an EpiPen.
Exactly. And that is where Dr. Dodson's clinical work broke incredible ground. He discovered that because RSD is so heavily physiological, roughly 60% of patients respond remarkably well to a specific class of blood pressure medications called alpha-2 agonists.
Wait, I really want to understand the mechanism here. How does a heart medication fix an emotional trauma response?
It's brilliant pharmacology. The medications are usually clonidine or guanfacine. During an RSD attack, the amygdala triggers a massive release of adrenaline and norepinephrine, throwing the sympathetic nervous system into overdrive. Your heart races, your blood vessels constrict, panic sets in.
Right.
Alpha-2 receptors in the brainstem essentially act as the brake pedal for norepinephrine. When you take guanfacine, it stimulates these receptors, telling the brain, we have enough adrenaline in the system, start producing it. It forcibly lowers the physiological arousal.
So it physically blocks the panic cascade before it can overwhelm the body. It gives you a biological buffer so the criticism doesn't hit you like a physical punch to the chest.
Precisely. It gives the prefrontal cortex time to stay online, but medication is only the hardware fix. The sources point to a multi-layered psychological approach to deal with the software.
Because you've been living with this for years.
Right. If you have lived with untreated RSD for 30 years, you have accumulated a massive amount of relational trauma. The recommended intervention is EMDR eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
How does EMDR work for an autistic brain specifically?
EMDR uses bilateral stimulation, usually watching a light move back and forth or holding buzzers in your hands while recalling a traumatic memory. The bilateral stimulation heavily taxes the working memory of the brain.
Because it's distracted.
Yes. Because the brain is distracted by tracking the movement, it cannot summon the intense, visceral emotional pain usually associated with the memory. It allows the autistic brain, which is prone to rigid, looping thoughts, to finally process and file the memory away as a past event rather than an active, present threat.
So medication stops the immediate flood, EMDR processes the past trauma. Well, what about the day-to-day management?
For the immediate moment the allergy is triggered, experts recommend dialectical behavior therapy, specifically the skill of radical acceptance. When the RSD hits, you don't fight it, and you don't judge it.
What do you do instead?
You sit down and say, my nervous system is currently having an allergic reaction to a social interaction. This pain is real, but my brain is lying to me about the danger. I will not make any decisions, send any texts, or draw any conclusions until this biochemical wave passes.
You essentially weather the storm by acknowledging it's a storm. Now, I want to take this hypersensitive antenna we've been discussing and rotate it 180 degrees.
Okay.
We just explored the extreme, unbearable pain of perceived rejection. But this neurological pendulum swings violently in both directions. If the nervous system processes negative friction as unbearable dysphoria, what happens when this hyperconnected, deeply feeling brain encounters someone who makes it feel safe?
Oh, that's a whole other experience.
Right. What happens when that intense autistic focus is directed toward affection, attraction, or attachment?
When the pendulum swings toward attachment, we enter the territory of autistic limerence.
This was perhaps the most eye-opening part of the sources for me. What exactly is limerence?
Limerence was a term coined in the 1970s by psychologist Dorothy Tenoff. Broadly speaking, it is a state of intense, all-consuming infatuation or obsession with another person.
Like a mega crush.
Basically, it involves intrusive, looping thoughts about the person, a desperate, aching desire for reciprocation, and an intense emotional dependence on the limerent object, the person you are fixated on.
But when we look at autistic limerence, as detailed by resources like Neurodives, the mechanism is entirely different from a neurotypical crush, right?
Completely different. We're looking at a state where the deep neurological hyperfocus, commonly seen in autism, what the clinical world used to call a special interest, is aimed directly at a living, breathing human being.
So a person becomes the special interest.
Yes, and for a late diagnosed adult who is already dealing with sensory overload, burnout, and profound rejection sensitive dysphoria, experiencing limerence is an entirely overwhelming, destabilizing event.
Okay, I have to push back hard on this. Because if we aren't careful, we risk pathologizing basic human romance. Isn't having an intense, all-consuming crush just a universally human experience?
Well, yes, to a degree.
I mean, everyone gets butterflies, everyone stalks their new crush's Instagram, everyone overanalyzes text messages and feels a rush of dopamine when they get a reply. Romantic comedies are built entirely on this premise.
Yeah.
So what makes this specifically an autistic attachment style? Why give it a clinical label?
It is a vital pushback because the line seems blurry from the outside, but the distinction lies in the neurological underpinnings, the intensity, and the specific function the attachment serves.
Tell me more about the function.
Let's look at a neurotypical crush. You meet someone, you feel a surge of dopamine and oxytocin, you think about them a lot, you want to impress them. It's an emotional drive aimed at connection and mating. Autistic limerence utilizes those romantic chemicals, but it fuses them with the autistic brain's inherent need for regulatory hyperfocus.
Explain that fusion. How does a special interest regulate the brain?
When an autistic person engages in a special interest, say studying vintage train engines or collecting data on astrophysics, their brain enters a flow state. The act of gathering data, categorizing information, and mastering a subject provides massive neurological regulation.
It soothes their nervous system.
Yeah.
It brings order to a chaotic world.
Exactly. When a person becomes the special interest, the autistic brain seeks data about that human being with the exact same relentless intensity it seeks data about trains or stars.
So it's not just, I really like this person and want to date them. It's, my brain inherently requires a constant stream of input and analysis about this person's behaviors, preferences, and whereabouts in order to biochemically regulate itself.
Exactly. The neurotypical person wants a text back to feel liked. The autistic person in limerence needs the text back because the data confirms the pattern, closes the loop, and regulates the nervous system.
Now, this creates a terrifying vulnerability. Because of the rejection sensitive dysphoria we just discussed, the stakes of this interaction are impossibly dangerously high.
Because if they are the source of your regulation, they also have the power to destroy you.
Precisely. When the limerent person receives positive attention, the dopamine hit isn't just nice, it is euphoric. It is the best they have ever felt. But if there is any perceived distance, a delayed text, a slightly distracted tone of voice, the RSD instantly kicks in, plunging them into absolute despair.
They swing from euphoria to suicidal ideation in the space of a 3-minute delayed reply.
The relationship dynamic becomes a roller coaster of the highest highs and the most agonizing lows.
And think about how that connects to everything else we've discussed. The sheer processing power required to constantly analyze another human being drains the phone battery. The limerence causes burnout.
And the burnout lowers the threshold for RSD.
The RSD triggers the threat detection system, which then sparks pathological demand avoidance as the person tries to desperately regain control of their collapsing emotional state by avoiding any further vulnerability.
It is a devastatingly perfect neurological trap. The attachment becomes a special interest that simultaneously regulates and destroys the nervous system.
That is beautifully tragic. You are deeply wired for profound, intense connection, but the intensity of that connection threatens to short-circuit the entire system.
So what is the actionable coping strategy here? If this is literally how your brain is wired to attach, how do you survive falling in love? How do you cope with limerence without losing your mind?
The primary strategy emphasized in the sources requires a very high degree of metacognition. That's the ability to step back and think about your own thinking. You have to develop a conscious clinical awareness of your own neurodivergent attachment style.
You have to recognize the pattern while you're drowning in it.
Yes. When you feel that all-consuming urge to check their location or read their old text for the 50th time, you have to label the behavior objectively. You have to say to yourself, this feeling is not romantic destiny. This is not proof that they are my soulmate. This is my autistic hyperfocus attaching to a human being. This intensity is a feature of my neurology seeking regulation.
It's like pulling back the curtain on The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
You force yourself to see the mechanical gears turning behind the magical feeling.
Exactly. You demystify the emotion. And once you label it as a neurological itch rather than a romantic imperative, you can utilize healthy coping strategies to redirect it. You set firm, non-negotiable boundaries on how often you engage with their social media.
That sounds hard but necessary.
It is. But most importantly, you actively try to redirect the hyperfocus onto a non-human special interest. If your brain is screaming for deep dive data gathering to regulate itself, you redirect that energy into researching a historical event, building a complex model, or learning a new coding language.
You feed the neurological hunger with a safe, non-human subject to satisfy the itch, which protects your autonomy and protects the other person from being overwhelmed.
You take the wheel back from the hyperfocus, you recognize the software glitch and write a catch for it.
Okay, this has been an incredible exploration of the emotional and neurological software of the autistic brain. We've explored the systemic exhaustion of autistic burnout. We've looked at the intense anxiety and need for control in PDA. We've felt the agonizing anaphylaxis of rejection sensitive dysphoria and the dangerous euphoric hyperfocus of autistic limerence.
They are profound, deeply interconnected psychological experiences.
But this is the part of the deep dive that completely and utterly blew my mind. Because up until this point, we have been talking about software, psychology, brain chemistry. But the most shocking revelation of the hidden autistic experience is that these issues are not just in the brain.
No, they're not.
They are physically, genetically wired into the body's hardware, the actual flesh and bone. And that brings us to the final piece of the puzzle. Connective tissue disorders, specifically Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or EDS.
This is where the realms of psychiatry, neurology, and physical medicine crash into each other in a truly astounding way. Dr. Emily Casanova, a brilliant researcher, alongside lived experience advocates like Rosie Head, have been pioneering the discussion around this profound overlap.
Between autism and hypermobility.
Yes. Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and hypermobility spectrum disorders are genetic connective tissue disorders. They fundamentally alter how the body produces collagen.
Let's break down the biology here. Collagen is essentially the scaffolding of the human body, right?
It is the most abundant protein in your body. It is the structural glue that holds everything together. Your skin, your tendons, your ligaments, your blood vessels, and your organs.
Oh.
In a typical body, collagen acts like strong, sturdy, reinforced household glue. It keeps your joints tight and your organs in place. But in individuals with EDS, a genetic mutation causes the collagen to be synthesized incorrectly. Instead of strong glue, their collagen behaves more like weak, stretchy chewing gum.
Which explains the party trick aspect of it.
Ba-da-bams.
The hyperflexibility, the double-jointedness.
Exactly. People with EDS can often bend their thumbs backward to their wrists or do the splits without stretching. But the reality of living with this stretchy glue goes so much deeper and darker than parlor tricks. Autistic individuals, and often their mothers, have a remarkably statistically significant high co-occurrence with EDS and hypermobility.
Rosie Head provided a vivid account of her childhood with this dual reality. She had incredibly soft, velvety skin that bruised if you just looked at it wrong, but the defining feature of her youth was chronic, agonizing pain.
She talked about suffering from severe growing pains, didn't she?
She spent 10 years crying herself to sleep at night because of these so-called growing pains. But they weren't growing pains. It was the micro-trauma of her joints, constantly struggling to hold themselves together against gravity.
People with EDS experience frequent joint subluxations, which is a partial dislocation.
Imagine reaching for a heavy book on a high shelf, and your shoulder simply slides out of its socket because the chewing gum ligaments are too stretchy to hold the bone in place. Knees buckle, hips slip, ribs shift out of alignment simply from sleeping in the wrong position.
You are living in a physical chassis that is constantly threatening to fall apart. But the connection to the autism software is what is truly revolutionary, because collagen isn't just in the joints.
No, it is everywhere. And crucially, it makes up the structure of your blood vessels and the tissues surrounding your internal organs. When the collagen in your blood vessels is stretchy and weak, it leads to a cascade of systemic failures known as dysautonomia.
We need to unpack dysautonomia thoroughly because this is the missing link. What does the autonomic nervous system do?
The autonomic nervous system is the subconscious control center of your body. It manages everything you don't have to think about. Your heart rate, your blood pressure, your digestion, your pupil dilation, your temperature regulation.
It has two main branches: the parasympathetic nervous system, which is your rest and digest mode, and the sympathetic nervous system, which is your fight or flight mode. In many people with the EDS and autism overlap, this autonomic system is deeply dysfunctional.
And one of the most common manifestations of this is POTS, right? Postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome.
Yes. Because the blood vessels are too stretchy, when a person with POTS stands up, gravity pulls their blood down into their legs, and the stretchy vessels fail to constrict and push it back up to the brain.
So the blood just pools.
Right. The brain panics, thinking it's losing oxygen, and dumps adrenaline into the system to force the heart to beat faster to compensate. So simply standing up from a chair causes their heart rate to instantly spike to 130 or 140 beats per minute, simulating a full sprint.
So the broader implication here is that because of the structural failure of the stretchy collagen, the body is constantly compensating by dumping adrenaline. The autonomic nervous system is trapped in a high resting sympathetic tone.
Exactly. People with this specific overlap are walking around every single day with their physical body constantly sounding the fight or flight alarm. Their baseline resting state is a state of physiological panic.
Oh my God. Let's just pause right here and connect the dots across everything we have discussed today. This is the grand unified theory of the hidden autistic experience.
It really is.
If your physical body is literally trapped in fight or flight mode 24/7 because your connective tissue is unstable and your blood vessels are too stretchy, well, no wonder you experience autistic burnout. Your physical hardware is burning 40% of the battery just trying to keep blood in your brain and your joints in their sockets before you even attempt to run the social masking app.
Yes. The hardware is draining the battery before the software even boots up.
And no wonder you have pathological demand avoidance. If your body is already vibrating in a state of sheer physiological panic, pumping adrenaline just to keep you upright, of course any external demand is going to feel like a mortal threat. Your alarm system is already blaring at maximum volume. A polite request to do the dishes is enough to short-circuit the system.
It creates an inescapable biological feedback loop. The genetic instability of the stretchy collagen creates autonomic dysfunction. The autonomic dysfunction triggers a constant state of physiological anxiety and adrenaline. That constant adrenaline drains the battery into profound autistic burnout.
And because the system is burned out and in low power mode, the brain has absolutely zero buffering capacity left to handle the emotional dysregulation of rejection sensitive dysphoria or the intense hyper-focused attachments of limerence.
Your literal physical hardware is sabotaging your emotional software. It is not that you are emotionally weak. It is not that you are too sensitive or lazy or borderline or bipolar. It is that you are operating a highly complex, hyper-connected neurological system inside a physical container that is constantly fighting gravity, blood pooling, and its own faulty glue.
And that realization alone, that there is a tangible, physical, genetic, structural basis for this lifetime of exhaustion and anxiety, is profoundly, life-alteringly validating for late-diagnosed adults. It removes the moral failing from the equation.
But validation doesn't cure the pain. If someone is listening to this right now and checking off every single box, they have the velvety skin, the hyperflexibility, the chronic fatigue, the unexplained joint pain, the dizzy spells when they stand up, combined with the burnout and the RSD, what is the actionable coping strategy? Because you can't just swallow a pill to fix your DNA's collagen production.
No, you can't change your genetics, but you can manage the physical reality to support the neurological one. The experts, including lived experience advocates like Rosie Head, stress that the most vital intervention is early and proactive physical therapy.
But it cannot be standard physical therapy.
Right, which often assumes typical tissue repair. You have to find a PT who understands hypermobility. You have to learn joint protection strategies. You have to actively build the specific stabilizer muscles around your joints to do the job that your stretchy ligaments are failing to do. You have to become the glue yourself using muscle.
You essentially have to build an exoskeleton of muscle to hold your bones in place.
Exactly, and you have to do it before the repeated microtraumas progress into permanent osteoarthritis or necessitate major joint surgeries. Furthermore, the sources emphasize the absolute necessity of aggressive medical self-advocacy.
Because the medical system is notoriously terrible at recognizing this.
It is abysmal. A young woman presenting in a clinic complaining of migrating joint pain, profound fatigue, and a racing heart is almost universally dismissed by doctors as having anxiety, being dramatic, or just needing to lose weight and exercise.
It's infuriating.
You have to bypass that dismissal. You have to seek out online support communities, share resources, and hunt down specialists, often geneticists or specialized rheumatologists, who actually understand the clinical presentation of hypermobile EDS and dysautonomia.
Because managing the physical symptoms, using beta blockers for the POTS, using physical therapy for the joints, staying hyperhydrated with electrolytes to keep blood volume up, getting the physical body out of that constant fight or flight state is the absolute prerequisite to charging the emotional battery.
You cannot heal the burnout if the body is actively panicking.
It is all one brilliantly complex, interconnected system.
Which brings us to the summary of our mission today. When we step back from the microscope and we look at the whole hidden autistic experience of the late diagnosed adult, we see a picture that is so incredibly far removed from the cold, clinical behavioral checklists of the DSM. We don't see a list of social deficits.
We see stretchy collagen triggering a physical fight or flight response.
We see the physiological panic and sensory overload draining the daily battery into crushing autistic burnout. We see that burnout stripping away the emotional armor, amplifying the unbearable anaphylactic weight of rejection sensitive dysphoria, and the all-consuming desperate highs of autistic limerence.
And we see how all of that systemic instability fuels the pervasive fundamental need for control and autonomy seen in PDA. It is breathtakingly interconnected.
It truly is. And understanding this completely changes the fundamental question we ask about neurodiversity as a society. For decades, the medical and educational establishments have looked at the autistic experience as a collection of behavioral deficits to be trained, medicated, or disciplined away.
We try to force compliance on the PDAer using rewards that only terrify them.
We dismiss the agonizing physical pain of the EDS patient as mere anxiety. We tell the burned-out adult on the office floor to just try harder and be more resilient. We spend all our energy trying to force this highly sensitive, hyper-connected hardware to run incompatible, neurotypical software.
But what if we stopped? What would society look like if we actually built environments, workplaces, and relationships where this complex, deeply feeling operating system was allowed to thrive exactly as it was built, without the demand to mask?
And that leads to a fascinating, provocative thought that builds on everything we've discussed today. If we look at this through the lens of evolutionary biology, we have to ask a radical question. Evolution is ruthless. Traits that are purely detrimental are usually bred out of the gene pool.
That's true.
Yet autism, ADHD, and these hyperconnected traits have persisted and thrived alongside human development for millennia. So if this hypersensitive, hypervigilant nervous system causes so much pain and burnout in our modern, loud, fluorescent-lit capitalist society, what was its crucial, life-saving advantage to human tribes 10,000 years ago?
Oh, that's a brilliant perspective.
Think about it. In a hunter-gatherer society who kept the village alive, it wasn't the relaxed, neurotypical person who slept deeply through the night.
It was the person with the hypervigilant nervous system who heard the twigs snap in the forest before anyone else.
It was the person with the special interest, hyperfocus, who spent hours obsessively categorizing which hundreds of mushrooms were safe and which were poisonous. The very traits that caused burnout in a modern cubicle were the exact traits that ensured the survival of the human species in the wild.
We didn't evolve to sit under fluorescent lights and answer emails. We evolved to survive. And the neurodivergent brain was the ultimate survival radar.
It brings us right back to the beginning, to that expectation of a clean X-ray. We keep trying to put the autistic experience into an X-ray machine, looking for the clean, jagged line of a broken bone, looking for a defect. We want it to be simple. We want it to be broken or not broken.
The X-ray machine doesn't work on this because there is no broken bone.
Exactly. The system isn't broken. It's just ancient, highly specialized, and incredibly powerful. The diagnostic muddy waters we explored today, they aren't muddy because they're dirty or diseased. They are just a completely different kind of ecosystem. An ecosystem that requires a deeply empathetic, interconnected lens to appreciate. And once you finally see it for what it is and understand how the body, the brain, and the emotions all link together to protect you, it all makes perfect, beautiful sense.
All right.